This is a video response to something I have waited for. The teaming up of world experts to take on something that came out of our mouths. An attempt to fight back against one of the most devastatingly simple videos undercutting the foundations of climate science, and an unspoken challenge to me. I accept. In this video, we went over the problems, both with what's in the climate models and what isn't. It was the short version of our textbook and hour-long presentations on the subject. It left no room to run, but did offer several traps, and no, I don't feel sorry about that, because I knew no matter what, any detractor would fall into them, and they did. It's not a nice article, put it that way. Let's meet the opposing team. Ooh, hefty. Don't worry, observers. We'll get back to these individuals momentarily. But let's start where they say the core claim of my video is that climate models don't do a good job estimating climate and the numbers consistently come in lower. Well, not the core claim of the video, which we'll get into in a moment, but let's just go with what they say here. And they're offering some charts. That's nice. Now they are saying that the thick black line, the observed real temperatures, matches up pretty well with 11 models from the last 50 years. The problem is, some of those are from the 70s, from the Ice Age scare period, and are far lower than the modern models. What I showed was 68 models, none before 1979, which is pretty much when all the cold-favoring models disappeared, and the data is clear. Observed temperatures come in low. Well, just look at this. All the modern models, and then look at this. 4 of the 11 they used here are expressly from the Ice Age fear concern period of the 1970s, and the 7 others are low sensitivity models. They are not the high sensitivity modern models I was talking about, and they know it. 100%. This was deceptive cherry picking and is utterly trumped by the data I selected anyway. They know it, and this cherry picking is almost tantamount to academic fraud. They offered 3 responses from experts regarding my claim that the oversensitivity to CO2 is a major failure. The first 2 actually seem to agree that it is an issue that needs to be addressed. The second one does think I underreported the findings in the field, but I specifically addressed that in the video, if you watched it. Even offered a link to where a bibliography of 500 more relevant papers could be found. When they say I'm selectively picking, they are straight lying. The third expert seemed not to be arguing with my point about the high climate sensitivity models, but seems to think that the lower models and cloud uncertainty is an okay place to be for now. They forget that all the scary warming talking points are coming from those higher sensitivity models, and the game completely changes at those lower sensitivities. They clearly selected an inferior selection to mine in order to get the results they wanted it to convey. It was wholly dishonest, and still, it wasn't the core claim of the video. Regarding the Arctic warming is half from ozone loss paper. They point to a face-saving line in the paper about the importance of human pollution, suggesting I misrepresented the paper. But that line does not reflect the significance of the study at all. They just say it, and if they didn't say it, papers like this can't get published. They go on below to suggest that radiative forcing data is where we can divine our answers here. We're going to shred that idea momentarily. But a similar trend emerges as the same, oh, it's just a small part of the story, was used again on our urban heat island effect argument. I'll take a moment to remind them that the study I cite is more recent than the one they cite, and they had to go back to the older works because the new one shows a genuine problem and is indeed published in the top climate journal on Earth. Then they pulled the same thing again with the melting polar ice triggers global cooling arguments. Yes, the papers throw in those lines about how different modern times are now and how cooling won't be the case this time. More face-saving peer review bait to get published, not to mention the fact that suggesting modern 1 degree of warming could cancel out the 10 or more degree drop of those cooler periods is literally nonsense. No analysis or math is done. Once again, they just say it at the end of the papers. Let me put this another way. According to them, it's more ozone loss in the mix, but CO2 is still the dominant factor. Yes, the urban heat island effect is real, but our older data still says CO2 dominates. And please ignore that newer study in the top climate journal on Earth. Yes, melting ice triggers cooling, but not in the CO2-dominated world of today. It's that same line, over and over. And the problem is that each is unscientific and unsupported by the papers. They do the same with the overturning circulation papers. At the end, they just say it's not stronger than human pollution. But go ahead, professors, fact check this. The ozone folks didn't look at the melting ice triggered cooling or the paleoclimate disagreement. The melting ice folks didn't look at the urban heat island problems or cloud uncertainty. None of these scientists are including the others' work. I just named a handful, and there are dozens. And how many different ways can you chip at that CO2 ice block before you say it's not the biggest chunk anymore? Go ahead, professors. Do they do analysis, or do they just say those things at the end of the paper? Is that what you call my misrepresenting the papers? What if you added all of those problems and the paleoclimate disagreements together? Show me the study. We'll wait. Then they completely go off the rails and into unambiguous academic fraud. I genuinely accuse them of intentionally misleading people and call each of their honor into question as scientists and as human beings. They show this, the soon-to-be unused natural forcing versus human forcing data. Volcanoes get a small say. The sun is virtually nothing according to them. It's all human-driven. But notice this timeline they are using. And remember what we said in the volcano portion of the video. Here it is. This is the volcanic aerosol cooling of the atmosphere during the time of official climate science. The problem is that this is the data from the US government on volcanic cooling going back more than a millennia. That green box on the right is what I showed before, the time of official climate science. And we are not only missing the true forcing power of volcanoes when we skew the timeline, but we haven't had any major cooling effect from them in centuries. When they ask where the century of heat we just had came from, if we're cutting back the carbon blame, part of the answer is that volcanoes have been taking it easy on us, not blocking out as much light. So simply put, they pick data that literally embodies the flaw I accused them of in the video. Literally doing the exact same thing I showed was misleading. They just hoped you wouldn't notice. And then we come to the sun. 0.1% variability in terms of climate forcing. The greatest of climate lies. I admit, most of those 500 papers in the bibliography are the proof and progress in solar particle forcing, not the solar irradiance used in radiative forcing equations. Particle and field coupling is where it is. With forcing times of 10 seconds to 20 years, none of it's in climate models. In fact, because of that, all of the real influence of the sun is blamed on humans. This was a huge aspect of that video and of the playlist I made specifically on how all of these mechanisms work, backed up with the peer-reviewed papers, of course. These papers and the boom in the field is why the IPCC is now considering particle forcing for the first time in the upcoming sessions. They realized they were leaving out an enormous part of the discussion, and where major solar blasts elevate X-rays and particle forcing to 4 to 6 orders of magnitude, what shows up is a drop in solar climate forcing if you just use the solar irradiance. I showed how this has happened with other great solar blasts, and no, professors, the new spectral irradiance doesn't help, not unless you found a way to sneak particle forcing from the solar wind and field coupling with the interplanetary magnetic field into the mix. Your radiative forcing, used in your article to try to debunk the actual core of the claim, that it's the sun, is based on cherry-picked volcanic data and ignoring solar forcing completely. You did exactly what I said was the problem in my video, and yeah, I checked. You cited that work that refers to the older IPCC reports, which don't use solar particle forcing, but from the organization which has agreed to use them in the future, and you dare come back and use that old data as your evidence. I showed in my video why that's academic fraud, and the IPCC itself is making a change that renders your evidence moot, useless, yesterday's bagels. In another masterful bit of intellectualism, go read a bunch of the papers they cite. Tell me they're not citing papers using those flawed models, warning of cloud uncertainties and concluding too strongly, and which don't factor in solar particles or cosmic rays, or which actually agree with the paleoclimate scenarios. They are praying you don't check, because they literally lied their way through this entire article. What I said in A7 applies to the B group as well. Everything they used in their article is either cherry-picked data or models that fail one of the A or B tests. It's astounding that they actually did this. And here's the thing. They're not stupid. They know every word I just told you. They knew they were just ignoring my actual arguments and regurgitating propaganda lines, even when the IPCC itself has begun to move on from that paradigm. They know all of that. That's why they are frauds. I know that's strong language, but they did those things knowing most of you wouldn't check, knowing many wouldn't go back and hear what I actually said, knowing most of you wouldn't read the papers yourselves. I do. This is a complete lack of honor from them. I challenge them to defend that honor and explain their thinking you are all too stupid to understand an argument for solar forcing. If any of them agrees to a 1-hour discussion with me, recorded for all of you, I will donate $5,000 to the climate charity of their choice or their very own climate science research. With all of the emails of these so-called experts being easily findable online, something tells me they're going to get my invitation. I'll see you in the morning for the daily update. Be safe, everyone.